It could be our biggest ever. We have over almost 80 vendors who signed up, including the Earth Day celebration area. And then we're also having the Tavern Wine Fest. You pay $12. You get an etched tavern wine glass, and then you get to taste all the wines of six local wineries who will be here. So after the lecture is done, we will have some refreshment, courtesy of the Tavern Cafe. And then that'll give you a chance to get a bite to eat, and something to drink, and also socialize a little bit. And then when you're done with that, I hope to encourage a few of you to follow me over to the tavern. We have several spinners and weavers here. Yo, spinners and weavers, who've graciously said after the lecture's over, they'll go up there and demonstrate and show you what they do. They're very talented, very proud of what they have up there. So I hope a few of you will wander over there after you're done here. You just go around in the front of the tavern to the red door. And now, and the gift shop will be open too. Okay, you might spend $1. So anyway, now I'd like to thank you once again for coming. Welcome, and I'll introduce Lisa Hull.
Thank you, Bruce, and thank you for hosting us today for your wonderful Rice's Hotel here at Leedstown. Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of the Northern Neck National Heritage Area and the Northern Neck 250 Coalition, I want to welcome you to the third of 5 events in the 2024 Signature Speaker Series. The 2024 NNK 250 Speaker Series is funded in part by Virginia Humanities and the Jessie Wall DuPont Fund, and the NNK 250 Coalition is grateful for their support. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the passing of a friend and colleague, Brianna Morris. Brianna was the director of the Westmoreland County Museum for 13 years. She was a kind, fun-loving person who brought her joyful spirit to projects that elevated the museum, furthered partnerships, and supported the community. Brianna's love for her work and the Northern Neck was evident in everything she did. She was always excited about finding new ways to share our history and to bring people together. And she was a member of the NNK 250 Speaker Series Working Group. Her handprint is on this event, and we know that she would have been excited and proud to see all of you here today. Brianna's passing certainly leaves a void in our hearts and our community, but we will always be inspired by her as we continue to highlight the history of this special place, the Northern Neck of Virginia, a place she loved so well. The Speaker Series, of course, focuses on the history of the Northern Neck and is part of a 4-year commemoration of the birth of our nation. Our theme this year is the power of place. Place offers a powerful lens through which we can view the past. It challenges us to think beyond modern political boundaries and to consider the full history of our region and the United States. It encourages us to reconsider significant questions about our history and to re-examine ideas about our natural and built environments and to reorient when and where we find our country's history. Dr. Julia King is here with us today to share her perspective on Leedstown. Many of us are familiar with it as the site of the Resolves, but few are aware of its broader history. Today, Dr. King will explore other significances of Leedstown through the archaeology she and her students have done there, and what it reveals about Indigenous peoples who lived in the vicinity for centuries, as well as the colonists who later lived at Leedstown. We ask that you please silence your cell phones and hold your questions until the end of the presentation. Dr. King is professor and chair of anthropology at St. Mary's College of Maryland. She has 30 years of experience studying, writing, and teaching about historical archaeology and Chesapeake history and culture. She has held several prestigious fellowships and received a number of major grants. From 2003 to 2011, she served as expert member on the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, a federal agency that advises the President and Congress on matters of national historic preservation policy. She has received multiple awards, including an award from the American Association of State and Local History for her book, Archaeology, Narrative, and the Politics of the Past, The View from Southern Maryland. The J.C. Harrington Award from the Society for Historical Archaeology in recognition of her scholarly contributions to the discipline of archaeology, and other awards from the Register for Professional Archaeologists and the Archaeological Society of Virginia. Her current research includes Indigenous history and colonialism in the Chesapeake region, for which we are very grateful. Since 2016, she has collaborated with the Rappahannock Tribe and landowners across the Northern Neck to uncover the region's rich Indigenous and European history. Please join me in welcoming Dr. King.
Thank you, and thank you for being a part of a beautiful day to be here. I really appreciate it, and this is a great place. And I teach, so I'm with technology all the time, and I know that it is sorcery. And so this is a little different, so we're going to see if it works. So I have a human being who's down in the trunk of the tree, ready to help us. So, as Lisa said, my name is Julie King. I teach archaeology and anthropology at St. Mary's College of Maryland. And I want to thank all of you for coming out this afternoon to hear my presentation on archaeology of Leedstown. I want to give some shout outs to Dr. Patricia Sanford, who is a Virginian and whose ancestor is from the Northern Neck, but long ago came to Maryland. So you can speak with her afterwards about that. Also to Hannah Tiffany, who made it possible for me to know so many people. Terry Wilson, who is from St. Mary's County, who is here. I know I'm forgetting all sorts of other people. The Davises, Nancy Davis and Jean Davis, who made their collections available to my students and me to catalog. And I know that there are so many other people in here. And and a shout out to Mr. David Putnam, who is my husband. Not often that you go places, unless it's a historic place, that they know your husband, because he works in historic masonry. All right, so I want to extend my appreciation to the Northern Neck 250 Committee for inviting me to talk about Leedstown. It's a place that I feel relatively knowledgeable about if we're talking about Native people, but not so confident when it comes to Leedstown's 18th century and revolutionary history, which I think 250 is pointing towards. And so this forced me to come to grips with that. And it's been, in fact, it's one of the few presentations that while I have notes, I don't have fully prepared notes, so we'll see how it goes. There's a clock up there. I'm glad that that clock is up there. This presentation has spurred me to remedy that situation. And while I may never be an expert on 18th century Leedstown, I know there's some Leedstown residents here, I can at least offer you some history based on the archaeology that we did there in 2018, and some detective work since. Now, can you all hear me? Can everybody hear me? At any time, if you can't hear me, I work with students. Nobody is ruder than a student. So you will not be rude if you tell me you can't hear me. Slight change to the title. Instead of finding Leedstown, as I really drilled down into this, I decided I was going to rename it Reimagining Leedstown. What exactly this place looked like on the eve of the American Revolution. Now here's where the sorcery comes in. Could you do next slide? Okay, I think there's going to be a lot of next slides, and then there's a couple of others. So some of you are aware that I've been working in the Northern Neck since 2016, with much of my work focused on the archaeological history of the Rappahannock Tribe. And we've been working in collaboration with the tribe. The amount of work that we do, and by we, I mean students, staff, tribal members, and landowners who grant us access to their property, or collections owners who share their collections with us, the work that we've been able to do and the findings that have come to light because the Rappahannock River Valley is not highly developed. So unlike the James and York River valleys, where there's a lot more archaeology, there hasn't been that much archaeology in the Rappahannock Valley. And what we're finding is really super exciting. Now, one of the most important native settlements that we have tested is known as Pissasack, which would later become known as Leeds or Leedstown. Next slide. Now, Captain John Smith, and I know you all know Captain John Smith, mapped, next slide, Pissasack in 1608 during his never a dull moment exploration of the Rappahannock River. If you haven't read it, you gotta read it. Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll, 1608. Who these mysterious Pissasacks were, we may never know, because they are not mentioned again in any record. Now, colonists are, after 1608, there's very few people in the Rappahannock. And those who are in the Rappahannock don't really leave any record. There's Strachey, just a few bits and pieces. But until 1650, when the Assembly opens the Rappahannock Valley to settlement, that's when we start to get a little bit more. We think that the Pissasack may have joined the Nandoticons or the Nanzaticos upriver. Next slide. Now, one of the most interesting finds at Leedstown, and maybe one you have heard of, and I know I've already seen some beads today, was this cache of glass and crystal beads, apparently unearthed in 1925 or thereabouts near the settlement's landing on the Rappahannock River. Now, this cache, and cache, C-A-C-H-E, is a fancy term for an intentionally buried box of beads, is even more mysterious than the disappearance of the Pissasack, who probably just moved upriver. The beads all date to the mid to late 17th and probably early 18th century, so they predate the town, but they post-date the disappearance or the removal of the Pissasack. They are bead types that are associated with native settlements throughout the eastern woodlands, from Florida to Connecticut, and you don't see them on colonial sites. You see these beads only on these native sites. But at the time that the box was buried, and we think it was 1650, maybe 1660, the Pissasacks had already moved away. So at least according to the colonists. So next slide. In 2018, my students, staff, and I spent a couple weeks in Leedstown trying to narrow down where that cache might have been located. And we think it's somewhere in that historical hole. We didn't find the cache. The cache must have contained hundreds, if not thousands, of beads. I mean, I gotta tell you, every museum seems to have Leedstown beads, because that's what people did in the 20s and 30s. You can have some, you can have some. Today museums would never do that. But who put them there and why remains a serious academic mystery. And I have spent many hours trying to crack that mystery with only moderate success. Next slide. Now, in the process of searching for evidence of the cache and the native people who once lived there, we also collected artifacts associated with the 18th century town of Leedstown. The 18th century town was not our main interest, but archaeological ethics and rules are that you don't just collect the artifacts you want, you gotta collect it all. Because somebody else may want that. And archaeology is not cheap, it's labor intensive, it's expensive. And so we collected all of the artifacts. This was 2018, I thought, at some point I'm gonna get to Leedstown. And then I got the call from the superintendent at GWA, Melissa Over, and I thought the time has come. So both join me and bear with me, because I am sure there are people in this audience that are far more versed in 18th century Leedstown than me, as we go down the archaeological rabbit hole that is Leedstown. Next slide. Now, Leedstown is most famous for the Leedstown resolves. I'm going to need to bring this closer to me. Crowded up here. All right. It's most famous for the Leedstown resolves, as you all know. I'm not telling anybody in here anything they don't know. This was a declaration that was made in 1766 against the enforcement of the 1765 Stamp Act, and it was signed by over 100 nearby residents. Tricia? There's her ancestor. I was telling her in the car, he signed the Leedstown resolve. She did not know that. I do my part for the genealogy of the world. What I did not know until I watched a great online presentation between Stratford Hall's Director of Research, Dr. Steffi, and Marquette University's Dr. Mullins, as they discussed the 1766 results, and you can find this online, was just how different these resolutions apparently were from others. Next slide. The Leedstown resolutions start off loyally enough, as the signatories pledge allegiance to George III. Always a good idea when we have a ruling monarch. Next slide. But it then goes on to use what the two scholars describe, this is in that Stratford Hall talk, as incendiary language and not so subtle threats of violence, the most dangerous enemy of the community. Next slide, and you can see even more. The utmost expedition convinced all such profligates that immediate danger and disgrace shall attend their prostitute purposes. That is, if they're supporting the Stamp Act. This ain't the sleepy little rural community that I thought I knew. Next slide. And in many ways, it ain't the sleepy little rural community any of us know. What I want to do in this presentation is to see if we can reimagine what Leedstown was like in the 18th century, in 1766, when these men gathered there and the Leedstown resolutions were signed and proclaimed. Next slide. So how do we go about this project of reimagining Leedstown? We seek out the clues, beginning with the documents, and noting that Leedstown was created in 1742 by an act of the Virginia Assembly. There was already a London merchant living nearby there, and he had convinced the Assembly, along with some others, that there should be a town there at what is known as Bray's Church. A total of 65 acres was to be divided into 50 one-half-acre lots, along with lots for the church, market, and streets. The legislation acknowledged existing structures, including the church and the public warehouses. So you see how we can already start to imagine what that place looked like by thinking there's going to be a church there. If you've been down there, you know it's at the bend in the river, and then the public warehouses, presumably for tobacco. Although if you heard Dr. Scott's talk a couple weeks ago, I didn't go, but I read his dissertation, you know, the northern neck is really famous for wheat, not so much tobacco. Next slide. The town surveys were to survey 65 acres for the town. This included half-acre lots, land for the streets, and land for the church and churchyards, or churchyard, a marketplace, and any number of piers or docks extending into the water. So there wasn't going to be just one, there could be more than one. 3 of these owners, including Jonathan Sydenham, who was a London merchant, and Clapham Richardson and Mary Fishpool. I'm so glad our names are Julie King, you know, or Smith or whatever. Already, rather than Fishpool, I couldn't teach if my last name was Fishpool. Already had standing houses there, and the trustees were to incorporate those houses into the town plan. Now, next slide. Buyers had to build, next slide, there it is, had to build on each house or on each lot a house of brick, stone, or wood. Well framed, at least 20 by 20 feet. These are 20 by 20 foot houses. You can see on the left and in the middle, that's Pear Valley. I believe it's on the eastern shore of Virginia. Pear Valley even has a brick gable end here. And then this is a reconstructed building down at Yorktown Victory Center. Next slide. And the wealthier might build a larger house, maybe 20 by 40 or 20 by 50. I know that you all probably recognize Emerson's Ordinary in Rappahannock. Next slide. So we can pick up other clues, for example, in land transfers. Now, if you've done any kind of title research, deed research, you know this takes a long time. And it's like playing the lottery. There's often not a whole lot of payoff. But because of COVID, one of the good things from COVID is the amount of digitization that went on with records during that period. And these land records can tell us, for example, next slide, the names of streets in Leedstown. Here we have George, Water, and Cameron. And of course, Water Street you see in many towns. George, of course, for the king. And Cameron, I think, is a nod to the Scottish merchants. Next slide. And we even have a journal entry from a traveler who stayed at, quote, Mr. T's, not that Mr. T, Mr. T with a long hyphen. You know how they would never say the person's name, and you're like, what? Why? I'm an archaeologist 200 years in the future. You gotta help me out here. So this traveler stays there in Mr. T's ordinary in Leedstown in 1754. The guy's name is George Fisher, and all these journalists are characters. Next slide. Who tells us that the accommodations were as good as anywhere in Williamsburg, Mr. Finney's or Weatherburns. So you start getting an idea. This isn't some sleepy little town. This is on par, at least for this traveler. This guy's super critical everywhere else. You've got to read this. He is very suspicious of single men, and he talks about that a lot. And he is. And the next slide, and he describes in here fairly plush surroundings. The chairs, tables of the room I was conducted into was all of mahogany, and it was stuffed with fine, large glazed copper plate prints that I almost fancy myself in Jeffries or some other elegant print shop. In London, print shops were places of display, galleries. And so this guy is writing about a pretty impressive place at that time. Next slide. So let's move away from the documentary record. There's many more other pieces, but I didn't want to, bore you with all of them. But they're all out there. They become the fragments as you try to pull together this narrative. What do the plans of other towns tell us? Can we make some sense out of those town plans that we can then apply to Leedstown? So the first one, and this is, I will concede, a very poor copy, but it's the only copy I could find online. Do you know what town it is? Rappahannock. And so you see Rappahannock, and you know that the streets may even follow this. The next slide, Alexandria, which is created in 1749. This is all happening in that mid-18th century. And you can see some similarities, and we're going to round through those similarities in a minute. The next slide, this is Colchester, which is up on the Potomac in what I think is Fairfax County today. And it was, this town was created in 1753. So next slide, what did we learn from studying these town plans? We learned that they are square rectangular lots with little concern with real topography. Look at Colchester. I mean, and you saw Alexandria. Next slide. And half-acre lots, 60-foot wide streets. And I'm like, 60-foot wide street? What the heck is that? And then, of course, I'm like, Dog Street, Duke of Gloucester in Williamsburg. And so you can see this is a really wide street. I guess to throw your trash and your crap and everything out there because you didn't have waste management coming through, or whoever does your refuse. But these were the town plans that survived. There has to have been a town plan for Leedstown. It doesn't survive. But then there are other towns where the town plan survives in the landscape. Next slide. So if you go to this, you all recognize Port Royal, right? Just up the river on the south side, on the other side. And you can see it's divided into these blocks. And so, next slide. And I pulled this off of the Caroline County GIS, where you can go and see who owns what. And you can see the yellow, the gold lines outline the current lots, right? And they're not perfect, but you can see these things vary from like 0.48 to 0.68 acres, right? And so you can see, so we've got a lot of towns that we can compare this to. All right, next slide. So then the next question is, what can previous archaeology tell us? Archaeology before my crew and I got out there. So if you look at this, I took this off of the Virginia Cultural Resources Inventory site, and it's only really available to archaeologists because they're very worried about people going out and pot hunting and doing that kind of thing. But if you see the red circles with the hatch marks, those are all archaeological sites. So I went into the records and I figured out which ones were the 18th century sites. Next slide. So do you see all those white X's? Those are the 18th century sites. So now we're starting to get, they kind of look pretty pretty linear, like they're following the water. I do have to say that the later at night and the more beers you have, this is going to make a lot of sense. So go to that wine tasting I was hearing about earlier, and then we'll, all right, next slide. So here's the aerial. Just ripped off of Google Earth. And it's tough to see lot lines. I mean, you can see all sorts of little things. You can see modern roads, modern farm roads. You can see some lines that are in the ground, but none of them jumped out at me to say we're part of the town. Now remember, I don't live there, and I haven't been working there since 2018. You may have clues that you can share with me about this. So let's put the archaeological sites on here. Next slide, thank you. So you've got the archaeological sites. Now, I can tell you, I modeled this off of VCRIS, and this means you have to be confident that VCRIS is correct. It is not always correct. It is not always correct. Part of it, I think, is by design. They want, in case somebody gets in there that is going to go and dig up a really important Native American sacred site, then they're not going to show that even on VCRIS. They'll show it, but they'll show it maybe a mile away. All right, so next slide. Ta-da! This is my improvisation of blocks of 1 acre each. And it's amazing what you can do with PowerPoint, right? And it's close enough. It's close enough, I think, to give you, to start thinking about how we can imagine. I didn't take it this way, because I'm not sure what's going on here. I didn't take it to the west, because I'm not sure what's going on that side either, because there's been no archaeological survey. And there's been no archaeological survey, professional archaeological survey, up in this area. So I can't tell you what's up there. So then, following Port Royal, next slide, I divided all the lots into little half-acre lots. Right? So you see it's kind of starting to form up, and those X's kind of match. I mean, some of them, because a lot of people bought more than one lot. And they were told, if you buy more than one lot, you could just build one house. And maybe there could be a little bit of misogyny. But I was so excited about this, I thought, I don't need any stinking prepared paper to talk to you all about it. I'm like, please don't throw apples at me. I disagree with this. Go to the next slide. Then, what's in the landscape? What do we see in the landscape? How do we need to add that onto the map? So here's the Braze Church ruin. I initially was suspicious about whether this was Braze Church. There's documents that say that Braze Church was built in the 1680s. I actually do not think that that's the case. I have seen no evidence to indicate that. And there are no artifacts out here that predate 1740, unless they're native, or those beads, but that's it. But you can see that there's a buttress on the side, so that looks very churchy-like to me. I'm not an architectural historian. I was texting my architectural historian friends. Next slide. And so I add the church, which is the red star. And then the next slide, those of you who live at Leedstown may have seen this brick floor down on the beach that's eroding out with its herringbone pattern. It may be, with sea level rise, which is happening, which I know is happening. I live on the water. We had to have our entire dock lifted up about a foot because the water was covering it all the time. And that may be happening here, it may not be visible. But at the time I was there in early 2018, I saw this brick floor. I looked up what brick floors are usually associated with, kitchens. I added it to the map. Next slide. And so you can see BF is for brick floor. So you're starting to get a little bit, this is even before I'm looking at the archaeological data. So now we have to go out to Leedstown and actually do some field work. Now remember, the field work that we did was for looking up Indigenous history. So we collected everything related to the 18th century. If I was to go back out there now, I might use a little bit different methods. And I would love to go back out there. Now that there's this idea that we can really think about what this looked like. But right now, it's not in the grant cards, at least. Next slide. So we went out there with my crew. You all know about the Leedstown campground. And we got permission from the Flummer family, very generous, They allowed us to go out there, and you can see some of the RVs. And here we're using our fancy survey equipment to put in a grid so that we can know this came from here and this came from somewhere else. Next slide. And then we began digging shovel tests. Now I'm going to spend just a second on this slide. You can see here's one of our crew members. There she is in front of one of the, and it looks a little worse for wear because I think a lot of people don't store, but they come back, right? They're there on a year-round basis, or they come at certain times of the year. So we had to negotiate all around these RVs. You know, you can't really dig under them. And you can see that she screened material. I don't know why it's cutting off at the bottom, but it is cutting off. You see her shovel, and it's going into a hole that's about this big and about that deep. And she takes that dirt and she puts it through the screen. You see her little cellophane bag, her plastic baggie, and she puts the artifacts in there. We record the layering, and then we take this dirt and then we push it back into the hole, pat it down, and then we move on. We move another 50 feet, 25 feet, or whatever. It allows us to cover a large amount of ground. If you dig a much larger 5 by 5 foot unit, you're committed to that spot. Which can be bad if you're not finding too much. Next slide. And here's the same archaeologist, and there she is down on the water's edge, not too far from that brick floor that you just saw. Next slide. This shows a map of those shovel tests that we dug. Each one of these crosses represents one of those shovel tests. The gray rectangles and squares are the RVs that were out there. And you can see that we covered the whole area. We had hoped to go onto this property, but we found out from the property owner that he had installed underground water sprinkling system, so we weren't able to go onto that property. These owners allowed us to come onto their property. I couldn't get in touch with these owners. So if you guys can help with any of this, and by the way, we carry a $2 million liability insurance policy, and we don't want your land. So many people feel that archaeologists want your land. I can barely keep my own yard going. You know, I like land and artifacts. I don't want them in my house. All right, so next slide. So we took all that data. Now here you're going to have to get a little bit into archaeology-ese. This is the water. This is the Rappahannock River. You can see the crosses, which are the shovel tests. You can see the gray things, the gray rectangles that are the RVs. And what we did is we mapped where the brick was. And you can see, this is beautiful, and these aren't those X's that you saw before. These sites were not known. You can see that there's brick here that I think is associated with that church. There's another concentration here, one here, and these are all about 200 feet apart. And so that's kind of really exciting, because one of the things about brick doesn't move, even if the field is plowed. Brick is heavy, it doesn't move. Now people might cart it away to use somewhere else, but they usually cart it way away. So I'm pretty confident, and in fact in this particular one, we did find part of the foundation. Next slide. And this particular distribution map shows you where the plaster is. So you've got the brick here. So these are some pretty fancy buildings. They've got plaster. They've got some window glass. I decided to spare you too many archaeology distribution maps. But then you've got plaster here. I'm not sure what's going on. Is that related to that here's that brick thing, the brick floor? Is it related to that? I mean, it could be a dairy. It could be, some place to keep dairy products cool and clean. And then there's the plaster up in the left-hand side of the image. But you can see how archaeology, when it's done professionally and systematically, you can start to really imagine what's going on. So let's go to the next slide. I'm going to put this here, and I'm going to take off my sweater, because I think it's like summer. All right, thank you for this little intermission. Thank you. All right, so next slide. All right, so on the slide, next slide. And those are where those brick blobs are. Did you see these just appear? So you've got the church. That's where we found one of the brick blobs. Now, with the plaster. and it's right at that intersection. Here's the other one, and you're starting to really see if these sites that were mapped in VCRIS, and remember, you have to take it with not a grain of salt, but some salt, right, to understand that it's 18th century. So this is our impromptu reverse engineered Leedstown map. Now, we found more than brick, and we found more than plaster at the site. We found lots of artifacts. In addition to those beads I showed you, and projectile coins, and flakes, and native ceramics. Next slide. So here are some fragments of tin, what we call tin-glazed earthenware. You guys might call this delft, or heard it called delft. If you've been in Colonial Williamsburg, you see examples of this. They're all broken up because there's been a lot of work out there. The field was plowed, and long before, and we've got aerial photos from the 1930s that show it under cultivation. Plows do a lot of damage to artifacts. But the beauty is, you can break that artifact up into a million pieces, and you can still tell what that artifact is. Next slide. And this is the closest I could find online to give you a sense of a very fancy little tin glaze or delft bowl that was at the site. Next slide. Here is, we found this fragment out there, and this is a piece of a dock diaper basket pattern white salt glaze stoneware. The one on the left is one that was for sale for like $1,800. You know, nobody buys the broken stuff, right? And archaeologists are totally down with that. We're not in it for the money. We're in it. The payoff to us, of course, is the knowledge, the historical knowledge. Next slide. This is a close-up of that rim, and you can see how close they match. And the next slide is a fragment that came from Mount Vernon. So everybody's getting this material, and it's showing up in Williamsburg. I mean, all of these places are in very close touch with the mother country and with each other. Next slide. This is a piece of black basalt that we recovered out there. I'm not sure what kind of form it is, what kind of vessel it is. It's some kind of hollow vessel. That's a rim fragment. The best that I could find that I felt would be useful for you to see, the next slide, is you see a lot of black basalt teapots. I don't think that this is a teapot. Then next slide. We also get reddish blue and gray stoneware, mugs. You've seen these reproduced. Tricia and I stopped at a couple of antique stores on the way down here, and these things from the 1990s are now for sale as antiques. But these are the real things. They were produced. Remember the pottery factory in Colonial Williamsburg? So we found lots of these ceramics, and we didn't find as many coarse earthenwares. And by coarse earthenwares, I mean milk pans and cooking pots. It was mostly these pretty fancy tablewares. Next slide. And then we found this weird little thing. And you know, I'm just like, oh, that looks like, you know, somebody's grandmother threw it out last week. His grandmother threw it out last week. But then when I went on to Tricia's website, the Diagnostic Artifacts in Maryland, next slide, I found this. Look at this melon teapot. And they were, I don't want to say they were all the rage, but there were a lot of them produced in slightly different forms. But you can see this is showing up on some table at Leedstown. So the next slide. So here we are back to the reverse engineered plan of Leedstown. And I've tried to assemble this from documentary evidence, those deeds, from town plans from other towns, from archaeological work people had done before, and reported it to the state, and then the archaeological work that my crew and I had done. Next slide. And a reminder that Leedstown rivaled Williamsburg in its urbane sophistication. Next slide. With its lots for up to 100 houses, a market, a church, warehouses, ordinaries, a ferry, and multiple wharves. Next slide. It's many merchants with homes in Leedstown and connections or even homes in Great Britain. Next slide. You take all of these, in addition to that English layout of the town. Remember we talked about how the English had no concern for topography, so what if this lot goes into the water? They also were building English houses with rooms full of English goods. Next slide. All transported on English ships bringing enslaved people and convicts. The Rappahannock was a place where a lot of convicts were imported and indentured servants to work the plantations, to take care of the houses, so that people would have the time to think about the political issues raised by the 1765 Stamp Act. So let me set the stage for the next talk. That's going to be by Dr. Philip Levy, who I think is going to talk about Leedstown and what we archaeologists in the biz call the consumer revolution, where suddenly everybody has those fancy teapots or those diaper basket pattern dishes. He's going to talk about how that consumerism, that is the desire for the same goods found on English tables, required labor that built the farms that allowed the signers of the Leedstown resolutions and planters everywhere, not just in the Rappahannock, to think about political issues and challenge them. Now we might look back and think that, wow, this throws a black mark on it. I would say we can look back and see this as the beginning of what becomes our democratic nation. So next slide. Thank you very much. And if you all have any questions, and I know it's just me and questions standing between you and some really cool food that I saw in the back. So thank